I call the member for Gippsland.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to rise on this historic occasion and support this apology on behalf of Gippslanders, but also offer my personal sorrow with the events that have taken place in the past, and offer my personal apology. And before I begin my remarks, I'd like to comment perhaps on the events of the day. We've just heard from the member for Fremantle, who, in keeping with the member for Fremantle's style in this place, has exhibited an enormous amount of empathy and thoughtfulness and respect for the people whose lives have been affected in such a way as to warrant today's apology. I think it gives great credit to the member for Fremantle, but also great credit to this place that we gather here today in such circumstances. And to be a part of today, I think, is something that all members present would really appreciate, particularly when we look at the ceremony earlier today, the remembrance ceremony in the Great Hall. Serious work was certainly done in this parliament here today, Deputy Speaker, as we came together to deal with what the Prime Minister described in his motion as an ugly chapter in our nation's history. And we came together to offer our nation's apology, but also to say to the forgotten Australians and those who were sent to our shores as children without their consent that we are truly sorry. Deputy Speaker, it was a day really for the forgotten Australians themselves and for these former child migrants. And while politicians may want to wax lyrical and talk about the event, in a sense, it really was a day for the people themselves whose lives had been fractured by the experiences they had as young children in our care. The fact that our state failed so many people so badly, abandoned them, and the betrayal they must have felt as young children in those circumstances is something that I really struggle to understand now as a father of 4 children and a member of this place to think that such events could occur in the past. And I also take up the member for Fremantle's cautionary tone that we need to be mindful that such events may be continuing still today in some form or other, and we will must be ever vigilant in that regard. So it is hard, Deputy Speaker, not to get emotional when you read the accounts in the Senate reports and the personal accounts of the experiences of these children, and the neglect and the abuse which has occurred is a fundamental breach of trust that we have as a community and as a government with our most vulnerable citizens being particularly our children. And I just want to give credit to the Prime Minister for the way he spoke today, and also the Leader of the Opposition and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition briefly before, as they made it. I think they made it come to life for many of us who haven't had that direct experience. Made it come to life that the challenge we face in this place as members of Parliament is to ensure that we take steps to prevent such abuse from ever occurring again. So it goes without saying, Deputy Speaker, that the motion has the unqualified support of the opposition, and I think today was really a major step forward for us as a nation in recognising that the appalling treatment has occurred in the past, and that many of these young children suffered at the hands of institutions, whether they be government-run, church-run or other charity-type organisations. And I found the contribution by the member for Swan in the main chamber before quite captivating as he told his personal experiences. It was an absolute inspiration, the fact that the member for Swan was placed in a baby's home at the age of 6 months and made a ward of the state of Victoria, and he quoted some harrowing examples of other constituents he has met since that time. Now, the member for Swan, I think, is a very humble man and wouldn't like to be described perhaps in these terms, but he's quite an inspiration in himself in what he's been able to achieve in his life after such a difficult start in life. And if you read his maiden speech, which I recommend to other members, there's not a trace of bitterness as he tells the story of his life, where 2 of his sisters who have been lost in tragedies related to alcohol abuse. And for someone like Steve Irons, as a survivor of the system that was in place, I'm sure that the apology that was given today by the Prime Minister and endorsed by the opposition in a great bipartisan way is something that he has taken a lot of heart from. And certainly I just make the point, though, Deputy Speaker, that I'm concerned that once all the nice words are finished with today, that there is a very real fear in my mind that there is not the will to go further and to make sure that we do everything in our own powers here as members of Parliament to make sure this emotion-filled day is capitalised on with a commitment to prevent such abuse from occurring ever again in the future. And I make the comment, Deputy Speaker, that it's not the size of the roof of the institution in which the abuse takes place that actually matters. If the abuse is still occurring under a smaller roof, we still have a major problem in our community. And I think it's smug somewhat and perhaps idiotic of us to even pretend to think that this generation isn't making at least some of the same mistakes with the current generation of children in our nation. The abuse does continue to occur, albeit under a smaller roof, and perhaps not with the blind acquiescence of the system, which we may have seen in the past, but the abuse does continue, both on Australian children here on our lands and perpetrated by Australian sex offenders in foreign lands. And I refer also to the contributions by the member for Warringah and the Leader of the Opposition, who both joined me in cautioning about that need to learn from past mistakes. The Leader of the Opposition said in his contribution today in the Great Hall, and I quote, "And just as we ask ourselves whether in different circumstances we too could have spent our childhood in a home as you did, so we should ask ourselves whether we too could have neglected you and abused you as others did. Or could we have been a minister, a bishop or a member of a worthy charity committee that presided over these homes but did not know or perhaps did not want to know of the neglect and the abuse that you were suffering? Those homes are long closed and they'll never reopen. But when we hear a child scream in pain in the next apartment, or we see a little boy at school with bruises or a little girl who seems sleepless and withdrawn, do we say it's none of our business?" The Leader of the Opposition went on to refer to his meeting with the National Association for the Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect. I've also had the opportunity to meet with NAPCAN on several occasions and regularly attend meetings of the Parliamentarians Against Child Abuse and Neglect. NAPCAN's sole purpose is to stop child abuse and neglect and to ensure the safety and the well-being of every Australian child. And the figures, Deputy Speaker, are quite damning according to research that NAPCAN circulates quite widely. 33,000 individual Australian children are known to be abused or neglected each year. That's 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 7 boys are sexually abused by the age of 18. 30,000 children are living in out-of-home care for their own care and protection. 1 in 4 children have witnessed violence against a parent, and 1 in 10 teenagers regularly binge drink. Now, these are figures that, in the context of today, when we've talked about the abuse of young people in our institutions in most recent decades, to be still quoting figures of that nature today in 2009, I just make the comment again, it would be smug and idiotic of us to think that our children are necessarily safe today. And NAPCAN works, as I said, to try to prevent child abuse and neglect wherever it occurs and to ensure the safety and the well-being of every Australian child. It has a range of approaches in that regard. It does advocacy work, it promotes social change, it attempts to build resilience in our children and our young people. It tries to develop a professional and parental skills and knowledge base, and also in terms of strengthening, it works to try and strengthen the community capacity. It's an incredibly complex and difficult field that we're referring to. It is emotionally charged, but also the areas that, the underlying factors which contribute to the abuse occurring is one of the main reasons why it becomes so difficult for an organisation like NAPCAN to break the cycle of abuse and neglect. It's one of those topics that we haven't liked to talk about as a community. We've turned, regretfully, we've turned away from our where we may have held suspicions and not necessarily believed the children themselves as they've come forward with allegations. So I congratulate NAPCAN on the work they're trying to do, and urge all members to do whatever they can in their work as representatives of their regions to support NAPCAN and support the Parliamentarians Against Child Abuse and Neglect organisation in the Parliament. Deputy Speaker, there's another area that NAPCAN is focused on, and I recently attended a function in the Parliament titled "Don't Trade Lives." And I think it's particularly relevant in the context of the motion today as it refers to the insidious human trafficking and the impact it's having on young victims, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region. And as much as we refer to the migrant young children who were forced to travel to Australia and put to work, often in difficult and menial conditions, there's an ongoing form of abuse that is occurring today and the Reverend Tim Costello was the guest speaker at the function that I attended with NAPCAN, and he made it very clear that the reports through the Asia-Pacific region of children still vulnerable to exploitation and abuse, such as bonded labour schemes, commercial sexual exploitation and domestic servitude. It's challenging for us all to confront these, what are very difficult issues, Deputy Speaker, and not just simply look the other way. And in my own electorate of Gippsland, the challenge is there for us as a community as well. We have rates of child abuse which are a constant cause of concern in our community. We have a significant issue in the Gippsland region where the rates of Indigenous child abuse and sexual assault are way beyond what would be accepted in any humanitarian situation and civilisation, and it's the same, I think, in the broader community, that we must remain ever vigilant. And I'm concerned that we have a situation in Gippsland where the government of the day at that state level has admitted that 60% of child protection cases in Gippsland were unallocated, as in the children themselves were not allocated to caseworker because the government department is struggling to recruit staff. So we're simply not on top of the situation we're faced with in Gippsland at the moment, and I tend to I offer to the House that we are kidding ourselves if we believe we're anywhere near on top of the situation of child abuse and neglect as it occurs throughout our nation at the moment. We need to provide the resources, and we need to understand that we have a whole of community responsibility to confronting this problem. Today we've had the Prime Minister apologise on behalf of the nation, on behalf of the government, but I put the challenge out there to the community in a wider sense that we must all remain vigilant, not just those in leadership roles as members of Parliament, but in our community situation wherever we may find ourselves, to be ever vigilant and to look out for those who are defenceless in the face of those who may prey upon our children. So I support the motion before the House, Deputy Speaker, but I do like to add perhaps a bit more positive note. I'd like to thank those carers and foster workers who have done the right thing and worked tirelessly in the past to assist young people who have fallen on a situation where they have been abandoned or orphaned. And the member for Swan noted in his maiden speech that foster parents have in fact been in a position where they have saved lives. And we need to be careful that we don't become so risk-averse to the negative publicity about removing children from some situations that they are then left in what are quite appalling conditions and risky situations which have often resulted in the past in serious injuries and deaths. So, in closing, Deputy Speaker, I'd like to read just from the motion before us today and offer my complete support that as a nation we must now reflect on those who did not receive the proper care. We look back with shame that many of you were left cold, hungry and alone and with nowhere to hide and nobody to whom to turn. We look back with shame that many of those little ones who were entrusted to institutions and foster homes instead were abused, physically humiliated, cruelly and violated sexually. We look back with shame at how those with power were allowed to abuse those who had none. And also to take up the Prime Minister's final point in the motion. So let us therefore, together as a nation, allow this apology to begin healing this pain. And let us also resolve this day that this national apology becomes a turning point in our nation's story, a turning point for shattered lives, a turning point for governments at all levels and of every political colour and hue, do all in our power to never let this happen again, for the protection of children is the sacred duty of us all. As I said earlier, Deputy Speaker, there's a lot of words that have already been spoken here today in relation to the apology to the forgotten people, and I believe there's enormous goodwill and heartfelt commentary on behalf of both sides of the House. But what it needs now is action from us and a commitment to ensure that we do not let this ever happen again. When it comes to the health and the well-being of our children, we must all commit ourselves to never looking the other way, to shine the light in dark places. Every child, Deputy Speaker, has the right to live in a safe environment that protects and fosters them in their formative years. We need to provide our children with the environment where their physical needs, their emotional and their social needs are all catered for, and that is an individual family responsibility and a community responsibility. But where those families and communities fail, for whatever reason, governments have a role and have a sacred trust with our nation's children to step in and provide assistance. We must make the prevention of child abuse a national priority for our community. And the momentum gained from today's historic apology must be capitalised upon. Our nation's people are watching us and I think our children deserve the best chance to achieve their full potential in the future.